Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Beth. I'm a 37-year-old attorney living in the DC area with my husband. And for today's video, I am going to be swatching the new NARS Stargaze Eyeshadow palette, which is part of their holiday collection. So just some brief information about this palette before we go into the swatches. So this is a 12 eyeshadow palette, with each eyeshadow being 1 gram, so you get 12 grams of total product. It is being marketed as an eyeshadow palette, but it does contain talc and carmine if those are ingredients of concern to you. It has a 12-month shelf life and it is made in Italy. So I purchased this from the NARS website, which is the only place I think you can currently purchase it. It retails for $60, which I thought was interesting. Just zoom out just a tad there. I thought it was interesting because the larger summer unrated palette was $59. So it's $1 extra for this holiday palette, and you are actually getting less product. So that is what the summer unrated palette looks like. I have a swatch video on my channel of that palette if you'd like to check it out. And just to unbox this one for you, you can see it has this star design. It's completely smooth to the touch, kind of a reflective black packaging otherwise. And you do have the names of the shades on the back. They're not actually in the palette. And this isn't a magnetic closure, it's just a normal opening. So you can see you are only getting 12 shades versus the 16 from the summer palette. And on the whole, the size of the palette is smaller. Each shade is still the same size though, so you're just getting fewer shades, but otherwise the shades are the same size. So whether that matters to you or not, I didn't look back at what their holiday palette from last year was in terms of price or size, but I just noted that difference there. Okay, so they say that this is their holiday edition palette of 12 intensely pigmented eyeshadows in velvety neutrals and shimmering pops of color. You can see it has the mirror there, and it will stay up if you want it to. So it says, seeing stars, all eyes on you with a limited edition palette of 12 intensely pigmented eyeshadows featuring an eye-catching lineup of velvety neutrals and shimmering pops of color. High-performance mattes create the perfect smoky eye. Pearlescent powders deliver on the drama. Silky satins glide on creamy shine, and glittering toppers brighten eyes with a multi-dimensional, starry-eyed surprise. Ultra-blendable color, unbelievable payoff, ultimate party palette. Features a holiday edition palette embellished with a star-studded design. And as you'll see from the names of the shades especially, this does have kind of a old Hollywood theme to it. So it says it contains 12 limited edition highly pigmented shades featuring matte, pearl, satin, and glitter finishes. So I always like to check how they say to use their shadows before I go in to swatch them. So it says eyeshadows can be used to shade, highlight, and line the eyes. Shimmer shades can be applied sheer for a luminous effect or layered for dramatic shine. And glitter shades can be applied dry or with dampened, they suggest their number 12 cream blending brush for a foiled metallic finish with higher intensity. So from what I can tell, the only actual glitter shade in it is this Hayworth shade right here, which is a glitter antique gold. If you're not familiar with how I do my swatches, I'll kind of segue into a description of that, although if you've seen any of my previous swatch videos, it hasn't changed all that much with the exception of this new kind of desk mat that I'm trying out. I felt like the white was a little harsh and maybe was kind of blowing out the colors a little bit, so according to the internet, like a medium gray is the best color background for color accuracy. Let me know what you think. This is actually two-sided, and it also has a lighter gray. So I'm trying this out, but if you have any strong preferences, go ahead and let me know down below. But anyway, I normally prime my arm. I'm going to use the Smashbox 24-hour shadow primer, and then I will apply finger swatches. I'll also apply dry brush swatches for the mattes. So I have a few of these Refer number 2 brushes for that purpose. This is a little natural hair shader. And then for the shimmers, I like to do both dry and dampened swatches. So for those, I typically use the Refer number 21 brush, which I think is a mix of both natural and synthetic fibers. And to wet my brush, I've been using the Tarte Maracuja Miracle Mist. Has a nice fine mist to it. And for cleaning off my brushes, I have the Sigma Switch. This one looks a bit grim, but I think that's just like, I don't know, soap residue that's stuck in there. I've actually thought about running it through the dishwasher. Okay, so yeah, I think that is all I have to cover. And I think for this one, I'm going to do each row at a time rather than each column. So we'll have 3 kind of applications of shadow and then removing them and applying the next row. So I think that is everything I need to kind of cover. One last thing before I get into the swatches, I was joking that the new, instead of a pop of blue in new palettes, it's a pop of purple. So after I finish swatching all of these shades, I will be comparing that purple shade to the Wisteria shade in the ABH Nouveau palette. So stay tuned to the end if you are interested in that. I will have timestamps down below if you'd like to skip ahead to any particular portion. All right, so the primer has been applied. I feel like it takes my camera a little bit to adjust to the paleness of my arm here. So I'm just gonna go in with my fingers into the first row here. So as I mentioned, this first shade is called Hayworth, and this is a glitter antique gold. I try to build up the finger swatch a bit. It's pretty sheer though, actually. Heartbreak is a matte taupe brown. It feels a little thin, but pretty creamy. Next up we have Hollywood Lover, which is a shimmering, soft, cool pink. And then finally we have Nouvelle Vague, which is a matte, soft mauve, or mauve. It looks a little bit more of a, I'd say like a light grayish taupe. I don't know if I would really call that one mauve. All right, so I like to kind of space these out so I have enough room for all the different types of swatches. So this one is Hayworth. And then this one is Heartbreak. Next up we have Hollywood Lover. I think that one's my favorite so far. And then finally, Nouvelle Vague. I don't know if I said Nouveau or Nouvelle. So yeah, those 2 shades are kind of right up my alley. And then going in with my Refer number 21, going into Hayworth. One thing, did have some kind of glitter kick up there. One thing I've noticed is that, you know, different formulas swatch very differently. So this is, I guess, kind of a thinner formula. Like it's not going to be that kind of chunkier, like silicone heavy formula that you might get from ABH, for example, or even like Huda Beauty. That one, I think as you use it with a brush, you can see there's almost a slight sheen to it, which I kind of like in mattes sometimes because I just find that they are a little bit more forgiving on the eyes. They blend a little bit better. All right, and then after I cleaned that brush, going into Hollywood Lover. I think that one applied pretty well with the brush, not as opaque as the finger, but still pretty good. And then finally, the last matte swatch here is Nouvelle Vague. Also nice sheen there to this shade. Very pretty, yeah. One of the reasons I decided to pick up this palette was I felt that even though there's obviously a lot of drama in this palette, there's also some pretty kind of basic everyday shades like these that I think a lot of people could get good mileage out of. Okay, so taking the other brush there, you can see, I think that was one of the mattes that kind of left some fallout. All right, so I sprayed the brush and going in, yeah, you can tell as I'm kind of dipping my brush into the shade, it's kind of, the best analogy I can come up with is like how popcorn, like the popped kernels kind of pop up. Yeah, I don't know that the wet brush really did much more for that. I always kind of give you a close-up after I've swatched a palette, but I will go ahead and zoom in. So hopefully you can see the little kind of flecks like that, which, you know, sometimes just happens when you use a palette. This palette, based on my experience with the Summer Unrated palette, probably won't look as destroyed as the ABH palette did after I finished swatching it, especially based on this first row. All right, so this is the foiled wet swatch of this. Okay, yeah, so you can see as I'm kind of digging into, yeah, this one's a little bit chunkier. Okay, so this is kind of more similar to the ABH formula, this one shade here. And again, I am kind of digging into the shades a little bit, but just be aware that that one might kind of start to pop up on you like that. Okay, so let's give you the overview look at the first row, and we'll do some close-ups. So there's Hayworth. It makes it very hard to keep referencing the shades when they're not printed on the palette. There's the second matte. And then those two right there are probably my favorites so far anyway. All right, so going into the second row, I've reapplied the primer and kind of given it a second to set down. And the reason I always use primer for these videos, I know I kind of repeat myself a lot, but I always use primer on my eyelids. So for me, I feel like it's the best way to get an idea of how the shadows would perform on the eyes. And same reason I like to do brush swatches is, as we've seen, finger swatches apply the product differently than brushes. So going into the first shade of the second row, it's Go Deep, which is a matte rust amber. It has a little bit of the Hayworth sparkle in there. That shouldn't matter too much. I meant to say earlier, and I think I got distracted, is that if you'll notice Viseart's kind of older, more professional targeted palettes, they have either all matte or all shimmer palettes, and it's precisely for this reason, so that the metallics and shimmers don't get into the matte shades, because especially with like HD cameras and everything, it would be apparent if you had some sparkle or something show up. So, okay, so that one was Go Deep. We have Los Feliz. This one is a shimmering copper bronze. That would be a really pretty two shadow eye look right there. Next up we have the lilac shade. So this is Instant Stardom. It is a satin lilac. And then the last one we have is Lights Out, which is a shimmering purple. This one feels a little rough, almost like sandpaper. It's odd. So again, those two would be really pretty together. Okay, so let's go with Go Deep. And then Los Feliz. This is going to be a little bit of a challenge because there's more shimmers in this row. Okay, so going in with the same rougher brush I used for the first row of mattes. Sometimes I swap in another clean brush, but they did me a favor by putting the lighter mattes before some of the darker ones. So yeah, and I can see kind of some of that sparkle coming through there. All right, and I think this one is the dry. One picked up. This one, this bronze shade, is kind of a cross between the purple and that shimmer in the first one, the first row. So that's just a dry brush, so it's applying pretty well. Then let's go in with this lilac shade, they call it. It's very soft. I mean, it has, I think they called it a shimmer or satin maybe. Let's see. Yeah, they call it a satin. So it doesn't have a lot of kind of formula payoff, and it also is showing up a lot lighter, I think, on my arm than it was in the pan. All right, and then this purple one, yeah, it's just, like I said, it's like sandpaper. Like, it's not, like, it wasn't painful to put my finger into or anything. It just felt super rough. I can't think of another eyeshadow formula like that I've experienced off the top of my head. And that is, yeah, they call it a shimmering purple, but I don't think that is, I don't know. I don't think of it as like being a traditional shimmer anyway. Okay, so let's use this dampened brush and go in like so. I think you get a little bit more opacity, a little bit more of a foiled effect with the dampened brush, but not by much. Interestingly enough, too, you can also, I think, build it up a little bit more with a brush versus a finger. And I'm not sure that foiling this shade is really going to do anything. One thing I say, and I kind of told you up front, like what NARS recommended in terms of its application. If you are concerned about getting hard pan on your shadows, if you go in with a dampened brush, you can try to pick up the shade with a dry brush and then dampen it. I think some shadows are more predisposed to being used that way than others, kind of based on how loose or how firmly pressed they are. This one is kind of getting a little crumbly as I kind of dig into it. I think foiling did give a little bit more of an impact though. All right, so let's start off the close-ups. So as you can tell, the brush did a lot better with the matte, which is not unexpected. I also, as I said, try to give the primer and everything a little bit of time to set so that I'm not starting with a damp arm. And I do also try to kind of get to the actual spot where the primer is on my arm, but I can only kind of do my best in terms of the variables. I do also use dish soap to remove the swatches in between. I find that it's the most effective and easiest. I try to use the makeup eraser, but it doesn't really cut it. All right, so freshly primed arm here. Let's go into Double Trouble, which is a matte deep oak brown. Looks like so. Swoon, which is a satin rich eggplant. Headliner, which is a shimmering dirty rose. Again, that same kind of sandpapery texture almost. And finally, we have Walk of Fame, which is a matte orchid fuchsia. I don't think that's how I would have described this one. It looks almost more like a, I'd say like a cranberry, Merlot, Bordeaux even, Burgundy. All right, and as you can tell, I am kind of getting some excess product that is flying off there. Okay, so we have a matte. Again, it will probably apply it better with a brush. That one's like kind of purpley, plummy, but reading almost like a brown. And then this one, which is a much more thicker, kind of textured shadow. And then finally we have this guy. which again, it almost feels like that one might, I'm not seeing much of a sheen to it, but it kind of had that feeling, if that makes sense. So the first matte here. I might have to build it up a little bit, but I think it will kind of blend. And yeah, I do see some of that sheen coming through now. And then for the dry eggplant, applies pretty nicely with a brush, dry brush. And then this one, again, kind of more of a texture shade. And hopefully you can see just kind of how much I was able to pick up on the brush. Doesn't really want to spread out very easily though. All right, and then the last one here, I might as well just use a clean rougher brush for this. I'm gonna call it a cranberry shade, especially if it's supposed to be a holiday palette, right? Yeah, so that one's very easy to use. Okay, so let's go back to the eggplant shade with a damp brush. Again, don't really think that's necessary or really helpful for that shade. And then finally, this guy. Yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's a very strange formula. All right, so that is the full row there. Again, give you some close-ups. All right, and this is kind of how things are looking just after the initial swatches. You can tell this one, I want to try and like get some of this back into this pan if I can. Probably blow it off after this is done. Yeah, so that is how things are looking right now. I'm gonna do a little bit more kind of playing around here. Okay, so let's get to, I think, the moment most people would be interested in, which is to compare that lilac shade to the shade Wisteria from the ABH Nouveau palette. And I looked up ABH's description. They say that Wisteria is a matte pastel lavender with sparkling reflex. And I said earlier that this is marketed as an eyeshadow palette, so it's not a pressed pigment palette or anything like that. ABH, on the other hand, markets this as a eyeshadow and pressed pigment palette because there are some shades which are not approved or intended, quote unquote, for use in the immediate eye area due to FDA regulations in the United States. They are approved for use as eyeshadows in the European Union, but ABH is marketing it to a US audience, so they need to have that disclaimer. So I think most people use it as an eyeshadow, the ABH one, but if that is of concern to you at all, then you might be interested in the NARS palette because that is marketed as an eyeshadow palette. And to be honest, I have a hard time even distinguishing the shades on my fingers, which, I don't know, I wasn't expecting them to be this similar. Let's see how they swatch. Okay, so they don't swatch quite the same. I think the ABH has a little bit more pigment. There's a little bit more of like a micro kind of sparkle going on versus, I don't want to say this one is a duochrome, but it almost has that kind of, I don't know, like icy blue shimmer kind of running through it in a way. So yeah, I think swatched, they are not identical. Pretty close though. I guess it would depend on how you use them. I'm just gonna put a little bit more primer on the arm. Yeah, I think on the primer you can see it a little bit more clearly, maybe, the difference between the two. And I'm kind of alternating between the two shades. So that's the brush, dry brush. A little bit softer, probably with the dry brush. Not quite as stark of a difference. I did do a similar swatching video of the ABH palette, so if you are interested in that. I also thought I would refer back to some of the shades that I purchased for the Very Perry video I did at the very beginning of the year. This is Such a Tool by MAC. This is definitely more leaning into that blue shade. Yeah. And I swatched a bunch of these in that video, so I think I also had some shadow sticks, which obviously would be a different formula. But I have these 3 shades from Lethal, and as you can tell, so there you get them all in frame. So yeah, so these are definitely going to be more on the lavender lilac side. This one, I forget how they describe it. I think that one is definitely stronger, kind of on the like duochrome front. So you may actually prefer that. I think this matte shade is what they actually describe as like a periwinkle. Yeah, much more blue. So anyway, just some options for you, and I thought I would also just do you a favor and cover up that purple shade. I think it does make an interesting color story, but it's also, I think, kind of eye-catching and looks a bit different. So I just cut out this little square piece of paper. Obviously, you could do that on a computer as well. So that is how it looks without the light purple to kind of catch your eye. So let me know whether that changes your opinion of this palette, whether you still like it or not, based on whether that shadow is present. Kind of scoot that out of the way now. So the question that we come to at the end here is, do I think this is worth it, and would I recommend it? So I think it definitely has some good basic neutral shades that you can get good use out of, like the ones I mentioned at the beginning. This doesn't really, I don't know, it doesn't really read to me as a glitter. It's more of like a, I don't know, it's just a really light shade. It's not super chunky. I don't know if I'd call it a topper. So I'm not sure how much use I will get out of that one. I really like these shades, like I mentioned. So I know that I will be able to use this kind of for an everyday eye look, which is a plus in my book. And it looks like you get, was it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 matte shades in total. So I think that's a good mix of finishes for a 12 pan palette. Like I said, you get that one glitter shade, and then I think everything else is described as either a shimmer or a satin. Like that one is a satin. I would call those like straight up like metallic. I don't think they're really shimmers in the way that I think of shimmers. So if you want to spend $60 on a palette, I think the ABH one is it 55? And I'm not saying these are identical color stories by any means, other than like that pop of purple that kind of looks like it's the same. These two shades, you know, they have kind of the same kind of warmth going on. This one has a matte dark brown, which I think some people will find more beneficial than this shade here. I don't know, I think it's just a personal preference thing. I'm not saying that these are direct comparisons or anything like that. I think the one thing that I just really can't get over is the texture of these 3 shades. Like I said, they feel kind of like sandpaper. I think if you were to buy this as a gift, for example, I don't know, I think the packaging does feel a little cheap and a little chintzy. I think if the stars had maybe been embossed or something, it would be a little bit more impressive, but having it just kind of feel smooth to the touch, I don't know, it just doesn't really wow me. And this by contrast, like it has a really nice kind of textural feeling to it. I did just place an order for the, is it Rose Metals palette, which I don't have yet, but I don't know that I would recommend this one as something you should prioritize in terms of either prioritizing for yourself or to buy as a gift. I don't think this would be my first recommendation. I think it's a little bit more travel friendly perhaps than the ABH. So there's that. But I don't know that this really pushes me to kind of go outside my comfort zone either. Okay, now that I've felt these a little bit more, they are kind of, I guess, smoothing out, if that's the right way of saying it. Like they don't feel as rough to the touch. I don't know if they just need to kind of be I don't know if the upper layer just needs to be kind of smooth to get rid of that texture. Those are all pretty. So yeah, so hopefully you found this helpful. I don't regret picking it up, in part because it's part of the nature of being a YouTuber is that you try a lot of makeup. But yeah, I think I will definitely be able to get some use out of it and have some fun looks. Like I said, I don't know if this will kind of push me and inspire me as much as the ABH Nouveau, but I think it's a perfectly serviceable palette. It just kind of depends on what you look for. So yeah, so I think that's everything I can possibly think of to say about this palette. I hope you guys enjoyed it and found it helpful. If you did, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And until next time, I hope you guys are all doing well and staying safe, and I will talk to you soon.